Lines here as we take a live look over the Vatican. We continue to cover everything related to the start of the papal conclave just days away, set to begin on Wednesday, that is May 7th.
Catholic cardinals around the world are converging on Rome to select a new pope. A total of 135 electors under the age of 80 will begin the conclave on May 7th. President Trump was asked who he would like to see chosen as the new pope. He joked about himself, then suggested an American candidate.
I'd like to be pope. That would be my number one choice. I'd like to be pope. That would be my number one choice.
Now, the election to select the next pope, the leader of the Catholic Church, will officially get underway. And I do want to pop up this image right here on your screen. Now, ahead of the conclave, the White House posting this AI-generated photo of President Trump as the Pope. No caption there, but the image retweeted about 29,000 times with, as you'd imagine, a lot of comments.
The world is moving in directions that is so frightening that if centralized action was made completely possible, we might see rather dark things happening in the future. And
it's not necessarily about modernization of the church, and I think that's what a lot of
no, modernity is a Christian heresy. So and I quite agree that I pick up on every point Tom just made. The trouble is we Christians have come hat in hand to the secular culture, hoping to find their approval. That's getting it completely backwards. That's the integrated Orthodox view coming to a heretical position and saying, "Can you please take us seriously?" And we stopped taking ourselves seriously. Yeah, the church has been around from ancient empires through medieval monarchies into modern nation states, through totalitarian systems up to the present day, sometimes flourishing, sometimes under fierce persecution. No need to remind you of that. It happened here for a long time. That to me is a rather amazing fact in itself, just the simple endurance of the church across the ages. Tom Holland can tell that story in much more detail than I can, but the very fact that we're still here matters to me enormously. If anyone's seen the Catholicism series I did years ago, I reflected on Cardinal George's experience. I mentioned him earlier when they elected Pope Benedict, and they came up on the balcony of St. Peter's there, and he had this very pensive look on his face, and the camera came in on him, and people asked him when he got home, "What were you thinking about?" And Cardinal George, who had a keen sense of history, said, "Well, I was kind of gazing out toward the Palatine Hill, and I was wondering, where are Caesar's successors? They're long gone, but Peter's successor is right there, and he's smiling and waving at the crowds. And there's something deeply weird about that, Now, Caesar has indirect successors, of course, but I mean, the Roman Empire, that's long gone, but yet the Church of Jesus that Peter and Paul and company brought to Rome, it's still alive and kicking, and that's interesting."
That is very interesting indeed. So we just saw a few clips, and I think we need to start by addressing the fact that the AI-generated photo of Trump as Pope is nothing short of mockery. It makes you wonder if there's just a bunch of little kids in the White House chat GPTing all day. Anyways, anytime something like this happens, it's always a great opportunity to refresh our minds on precisely what the role of the Pope actually is and how he functions in the church and what the church in and of itself actually stands for.
I want to ask you some basic kind of Catholic doctrinal questions, because I think we in the general public who aren't Catholic have some basic views about Catholicism that are likely wrong, but well accepted. So papal infallibility, can you just define that? How far does the Pope's infallibility go? Do I have to take everything, if I'm a Catholic, that he says at face value? Is some of it political interpretation? What is the vicar of Christ, and what is just him saying things?
Yeah, well, it's very narrowly defined. That's the important thing within Catholic ecclesiology. We say the theology of the church. When the Pope speaks, we say ex cathedra, from the chair, right? In the formal manner on matters of faith and morals for the sake of the entire church. He's speaking infallibly. It's happened precisely twice since the thing was declared formally. So this is a very, very rare thing. We speak about the infallibility of the ordinary magisterium. Now that means the bishops in union with the Pope teaching on a key matter of faith and morals in general consensus around the world. We recognize that as an infallibility of this ordinary teaching of the church. But the Pope himself, it's on such rare occasion. Now, the Pope does deliver himself of formal teachings like encyclicals, which have to be taken with tremendous seriousness. But might a Catholic, quarrel here and there with something in an encyclical? Sure, it's not an infallible statement. Much less certain prudential judgments of a pope. A pope might make a judgment, a prudential determination about a policy within the church, or a political judgment. Is one obliged to accept that? No. I mean, we approach the pope always in an attitude of deep respect. He's a successor of Peter. He's the vicar of Christ. He's the guarantor of our unity. So the pope is always treated with enormous respect. But the infallibility is a very, very narrowly defined quality. So I think it's the danger is like, the Pope is going to reign tomorrow, therefore it's going to rain tomorrow. No, that's not Catholic teaching.
I was going to ask you about the 3 popes of the last 25 years, 30 years. So Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and Pope Francis. As a Jew, I get to criticize popes however much I want, which is great for me. But my perception has been that Pope John Paul II, obviously a historic figure in many ways, particularly in his anti-communism. Pope Benedict, a traditionalist, one of the great religious thinkers of our time. And I've been highly critical of Pope Francis, who's been perceived by the media as much more progressive on politics, much more focused on issues like global warming than, for example, abortion. Do you think that is a mislabel of Pope Francis's actual legacy, or do you think that the media are doing a responsible job in covering what exactly Pope Francis is doing?
Yeah, I mean, every pope has a specific emphasis. I mean, so John Paul coming out of his great struggle with communism, and that massively influences his social thinking. Benedict, I think, coming out of his European cultural background and wanting very much to re-evangelize Europe, I would say that's maybe key to him. Francis coming out of his Latin American, specifically Argentinian background. I think a certain suspicion of probably of American capitalism is in the Pope's thinking, in his intellectual wheelhouse. He's a prophetic type voice. So he's critical. He does what the prophets often do. He criticizes what he takes to be all these excesses within the capitalist system. He's not so much a constructive thinker there. Like, what's he proposing as the way forward? He's in the sort of Jeremiah mode, I think, of putting his finger on excesses. Now, read John Paul II on the market economy, for example. He's a great advocate of it. In Centesimus Annus, he says the church advocates the market. He prefers to call it then rather than capitalism. But very clearly says a market circumscribed morally, circumscribed legally, a market that is not simply open to the free play of buying and selling, et cetera. So I think Francis picks up on that side of it, maybe without the balance you found typically in a John Paul. But that's also typical of the prophets. They tend to be a little over the top. That's how I read Francis.
What do you think of the critique that's been made by a lot of folks that he is a devotee of liberation theology? Because
I think that's almost demonstrably false, because at a certain point in his development, he knew the liberation theology movement and turned against it. It's more of a populism, I would say. It was not the embrace of the Marxist option. He was very influenced by a Frenchman called Gaston Fossard, who was a mid-century French Jesuit, sharply critical of Marx and of Marxism. And so I think Bergoglio consciously departs from liberation theology, opts for a different path. It's more of a populism. It's an embrace of popular piety. It's an embrace of kind of the people. Now, not in the Marxist sense of the term, but more in this Latin American sense. So I think he's demonstrably not with liberation theology.
So I found that conversation of Bishop Barron and Ben Shapiro very illuminating and very helpful to have kind of a skeptical position. Being a skeptic, asking questions about the church and about the Pope is very helpful for clarity's sake. To conclude our time, I want to show one more clip, this time with Bishop Barron and Jonathan Pageau. And they're dealing with more of the symbolic nature of the church and the scriptures and how to think about these things in a more theological way. Now, Pageau offers a critique worthy of pondering, I think, and that's why I want to show this clip. It's not all roses and sunshine. There are some things that we need to ponder and things that need to be corrected, and I think that Jonathan Pageau offers a worthy critique of how we are to think about the pride of Peter that can arise within the church and how the Pope actually is a guardian against that. Okay, let's go ahead and watch this, and I will see you in the next one.
In light of everything we've been saying, this way of thinking and hierarchies and gatherings and all that, an argument that Johann Adam Müller, he was one of the so-called Tübingen school, early 19th century, that had a big impact on later theology and eventually Vatican II. He makes this argument in his dialogue with Protestants,
about the papacy. He said every community needs some visible unifying, principle. So a parish needs a pastor that gathers the people around himself. A diocese. So I'm bishop of a diocese here, and that's in a way my purpose. I've got a juridical role. I make certain practical judgments and financial decisions and so on. But my basic job here is to gather the people of this diocese. I'm the sign and instrument of their unity. So Mueller says the entire Christian family needs a singular figure who gathers the many into the one. So it was not so much a juridical argument, it was I would say, mystical, symbolic kind of argument. How would you engage that, let's say from an Orthodox perspective? I think that's how I would defend the papacy as a very important element within Christianity.
So I think, how can I say this? It's like, I think that Christ foresaw in some ways this issue. And the way that Christ foresaw it is not just the way Christ foresaw it. It's there in the very structure of the biblical story, which is that God puts an intermediary. God sets a representative for him in the world. And that representative is constantly, it's important, but it's also constantly in danger of becoming prideful.
Yeah.
And I think that in the story of St. Peter, Christ does it in a crazy way, because he says, you are the stone
You're
on which
the
I'm going to build
rock,
my church, and then he
and get
turns
behind me,
around and he
Satan.
says, get behind me, Satan, right away. So the intermediary can easily become the opponent. And I think that, I think that the primacy of Peter, which is something that the entire church recognized in the first centuries, at least for the rest of the church, for the Orthodox church, at some point it seemed that it was the pride of Peter that we were facing, and that Peter was acting like a king that was trying to basically control everything. And I think that the consequences of that, whether it is the difficulty of the Eastern Christian Catholic churches, and the conflicts that were born in those realities are still live, and they make it difficult, I think, for the church to fully come back together, and I don't think that it's impossible. I think that eschatologically, and so maybe some Orthodox will be annoyed that I say that, but I think that eschatologically we have to see a return of the body, in order for the bride to receive the bridegroom. But I really don't see that. I think that at least for now, the Orthodox tradition represents a powerful check on Peter's pride, which is inevitable in some ways.
Yeah, think of John Paul II, in 1995 proposes, is there a new way we could think about this?
Yeah.
Pope Francis recently kind of reiterated that. Is there a new way we could imagine the Petrine primacy and so on?
But it's a scary thing. And I say this even as an Orthodox Christian, is that the strength of Peter and the strength of the Catholic Church is its capacity for central action and its capacity to mobilize.
Right.
The weakness of the Orthodox Church is its fractiousness, and it is fractious. They can't even have a synod. But at least for now, with everything that's happening in the world, I am grateful for the sins of the Orthodox Church. In the sense, I'm grateful for their fractiousness, because the world is moving in directions that is so frightening that if centralized action was made completely possible, we might see rather dark things happening in the future. And I like the fact that we can't actually reach consensus, because it's not clear that consensus, at least at this moment, would be something that we would want.
Right. And one reason I'm attracted to the Johann Otto Müller argument is, again, it's more symbolic. It's the sort of sacramental quality of the unity of the church that the Pope would embody. Now, indeed, we're priest, prophet, and king. So there's the archetype of Christ. And so the high priest of the church, Pope, prophet, he's the one that adjudicates disputes. So he's the final word. But also king. He's also the one that makes decisions practically about how the church is to move in the world. I would recognize all three of those as important. But I totally get, you're right about the original scene in the Gospels. And that Peter right away is named as a problem just after being named the rock.
But I think we'll see a beautiful. I trust God and I trust Christ, and I think that we will see the story that we see in Scripture, the Peter story that we see in Scripture. We'll see it play out as well, which is the beautiful image of how Peter encounters Christ after the resurrection. Is one of the most beautiful images in Scripture, where
Feed
Peter,
my sheep and feed my lambs.
he actually, and you have to see it, not just that, you have to see it in line with the story of Peter trying to walk on water. Because now he doesn't even try to walk on water. He dives into the water.
Yeah.
And he dives in order to encounter his risen Lord. And then Christ basically tells him what his function is. And so, I think that, I believe that we will see something like that happen. I don't know when. I don't know. Is it completely eschatological? But I don't see there's another way. Yeah. So.
Do you read him there as sinful Adam? He's naked, but then throws on clothes before he comes to the Lord. So he's.
It's a fascinating image because it doesn't make sense, right? Narratively. Like, why is he actually putting on? And I think it does have to do with. This is going to sound weird to people because they don't know the way that. Like, I think it has to do with the healing of Malchus's ear. Actually, it has to do with Christ making the exterior whole, right? It has to do with the heavenly city, and so it's not that you remove the garments anymore, like remove the sandals in order to enter this central place. It's that Christ is making the garments full, like in the transfiguration of Christ's garment becoming illumined. I think that's what's happening in that story where Peter actually now puts it all on in order to come into his final encounter with Christ.
It is weird, isn't it? In the New American Bible, I think some years ago, the translation of the word is gymnos in Greek, naked, right? It says Peter was lightly clad. Well, it's not lightly clad. The fact that why would he be naked in the boat? I mean, I get maybe I get lightly clad, but why would you be naked in the boat?
Well, it's reference to Genesis.
Unless there's something going on.
You bet it's a reference to Genesis.
Yeah, all that, and Adam ashamed in the presence of the Lord.
Yeah.